Hi, and welcome back for this second part of this great presentation and this part is focused on virtual drills and exercises, best practices, and it's transitioning from offline to online. Welcome to Ron Crane from Summit ET.
Hello, welcome to Transitioning from Offline to Online, Virtual Drills and Exercises Best Practices. I'm Ron Crane and honored to be here, as well as very happy to be joining my colleagues that you hopefully were able to get their presentation and see their presentation, Holly Harden and Mark Bassnight. And they have gone through a lot of the nuts and bolts. I'm going to go through some other concurrent or particular areas within virtual training and exercises, particularly best practices, things that we found that work very, very well in this brave new world that we happen to find ourselves in. With that, let's go ahead and get started. As with anything, of course, we're going to go ahead and start with our agenda. Just quickly looking at where we're going throughout this presentation. We're going to look at the different challenges, particularly to start, that were posed going from online in-person trainings to virtual training exclusively in a very, very short amount of time. And that dovetails into the next bullet that you can see, going from 0 to 60 quickly. Presenting in a vacuum, as well as associated technical issues. You're going to find out, if you haven't already, that Murphy, as in Murphy's Law, is very much alive and well. We'll go through that, and we'll also help you to understand some of those areas that you can refine to improve upon virtual training and exercises. And then, as the final point, is best practices. So with that, it's important to start off with what it is that we're all doing here. In many respects, we're professional talkers. But most importantly, what are we trying to do with any type of training event, with any type of exercise, whether it's discussion-based exercise, notional, what have you, is we're trying to communicate. And I am pretty confident that everybody who is a part of this workshop series of this conference has taken at least one online or in-person NIMS ICS course at some point in time in their career. At the very outset, IS 100, FEMA IS 100, what are the first things that they teach you in terms of the different types of communication styles with respect to incident command and incident management? It's the best type of communication is face-to-face. And in fact, part of the instructional manual, part of the documentation says that transfer of command in the middle of an incident should, if at all possible, or rather is required to take place when possible. If you further go out from government, from public service, from incident management, we find that face-to-face or in-person communication in the workforce out in the corporate world is the most effective way to communicate with people. It, of course, builds trust, as you can see there, improves understanding. And more importantly, it ensures that the proper message is being shared. We live in an incredibly increasing digital world. And how many times have you seen or been, hopefully not, but been a part of a exchange of information, whether it be by email or text, that was completely taken out of context by the receiving party? That's why face-to-face communication, that's why in-person communication, being together, is very, very important. Most in-depth drills, exercises, training events, what have you, traditionally are done face-to-face. They're held in person, and you are able to communicate back and forth with the respective parties. And then the last and most important piece, most important information is imparted face-to-face. And you'll see that in our next slide. I like to try and tell a story through pictures. As you can see, the first slide there is the Yalta Conference in February of 1945, where those three men, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, President Franklin Roosevelt, and Premier Joseph Stalin, in essence, pretty much decided the fate of not just Europe, but the world for the next 40 years or 50 years along with their staffs. There was no other way to do that unless the three of them got together. If you fast forward to something that is a lot more relatable to us, the iconic pictures of September 11th. The one on the immediate left is of President Bush across aboard Air Force One, speaking to the POC, or the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, there in the White House with his top staff, from the Vice President on down, National Security Advisor, Director of Communications, etc. And there are hundreds of thousands of words written as to the communication failures that were experienced during 9/11 and as a result of 9/11. Then finally, that bottom picture. The most important things that you do in your life, you're not going to be Skyping in. And I thought it was appropriate to put that picture of a wedding because, frankly, if you're going to Skype into a wedding or to get married, it's probably not going to work out well. But that's one of those things that you need to be in person to do. So I think everyone understands how important communication is, and in the different modalities and the different ways that we go ahead and communicate. And then we got this little bugger. Late 2019 and into early 2020, as we all know, the way that we conduct business, the way that we work and live both professionally as well as personally, completely changed. What does that mean? In terms of training and exercises and what it is that we do and what it is that we are challenged to go ahead and impart to our customers and to our clients, it posed rather a very, very significant issue or multiple issues. To give you a little bit of context of how it impacted not only myself, but my team as well as my company as a whole. In March of 2020, I was in Helena, Montana, along with other members of our team and other federal sponsors, clients, what have you, as well as folks from all over the state and in Montana and other places, facilitating and putting on one of our exercise series, or an exercise within our exercise series, Isotope Crossroads, Montana. During that exercise, we were literally getting messages back and forth about travel being canceled and what have you. In fact, our CEO had literally landed in Argentina on behalf of the government to help facilitate a training event and was told to get back on the plane and come back. Later in the week, another training event that we had, Isotope Crossroads, was postponed. Isotope Crossroads Puerto Rico was postponed. At the end of March, as you all will recall, all travel is canceled or postponed. In some cases, we don't have any idea of when we're going to resume travel, at least for face-to-face, large-scale training events. Our clients, our sponsors were scrambling like everyone else. For a considerable amount of time, for at least 4 to 5 weeks, we were going back and forth, but the message was clear. We're not going to virtual training. There was some trepidation, there was some fear that if we went to the virtual realm, we would never go back to in-person training. More on that in a few minutes. Then literally overnight, over a weekend, on a Friday, we were talking again that no, we're not going virtual. Monday morning, we're going virtual. And as you can see in that last bullet point, it's on literally and figuratively. So what do we do? As you can see, the transition from in-person to virtual training. This slide may look a little familiar to you because my colleagues used it, but I think it's important to impart some of these lessons again. But to meet the new mission requirements, transitioning from in-person training to virtual training, we had to do a lot of work in a very short amount of time. But we had to look at different areas in terms of virtual training and the different platforms that are out there. Learner engagement and ease of use, as Holly and Mark discussed, are critically important. We'll talk about that more, as well as access and the security that not only is on the platform, but more importantly, the security that you have as an end user at the end of the line. And then not only conformity, and we'll talk more about that in terms of FedRAMP and FISMA, but cost. And some of these things are not cheap, guys, and there is not one size fits all. We'll discuss that more in a moment. In terms of the learning engagement component, how do we impart, most importantly, that last bullet, how do we closely replicate virtual to real? Can you do that? Is it possible to do that? And what do we need to do in order to get as close as we can? Can we get as close as we can? So, how do you continue to support the mission? As you can see there, those are multiple different training events across the country, as well as the bottom right-hand panel. That is a international training event between the United States and Canada. But you can see everybody's together. Everyone is working together. Ideas are being exchanged back and forth across the tables or across the room. How do you go from that? And frankly, it should be noted that the bottom left-hand corner picture, that picture was taken from a training event that I was a part of back in February of 2013. The most recent one is the top middle that was in Philadelphia in 2019. So you can see I've been a part of this and we've been doing this for quite some time. How do you go from that to this? I think that picture is very emblematic of where we were when we started. It's a clever play, but I think it makes a lot of sense in terms of the visual application because, frankly, that's where we were. What are we going to do? How are we going to make sense of all of this mess? And how do we go from that horrid mess where it seems like the servers and the wires and everything are swallowing that individual whole to something that's clean, something that works, something that makes sense, and imparts the information and gets the information downrange as quickly and as easily as possible. So what do we do? How do we get there? You got a lot of choices. I can personally attest that myself and my colleagues, our company at Summit Exercises and Training, we have literally and figuratively looked at and worked with every single one of these platforms. There is a lot of functionality, as you heard Mark and Holly mention, but as you can see that note down at the bottom left-hand side, remember all platforms are not created equally. There are tremendous challenges, there's tremendous capability, there's ease of use, there are different types of issues that you've got to deal with, but which one do you use? Is one size fits all best, and how do you proceed? This slide, I think, is emblematic of what we do and where we are and where we want to be. On the left-hand side, of course, that's where we ultimately want to get to. That concert, that big show, getting it all done, wrapping it up. But I purposely made the picture on the right bigger and sharper than the one on the left because that is what a virtual training event looks like before you get to the actual big show and are able to communicate the information that you need. There is a lot of work that needs to be done. With that, as you can see, labor and input, Holly touched on it, but I'm going to double down on it. Assume at least double the personnel for virtual versus an in-person facilitated event. That's just the way it's going to be. There are a lot of back of the house, backstage things that need to be taken care of and that you need to have folks dedicated to and assigned to assist you. It can't just be one or two people. In order to do this thing right, you need to have multiple personnel supporting the event. There needs to be roles and responsibilities that are clearly delineated between tech support, between facilitation, and even within the facilitated component. You need presenters as well as note takers. You need timekeepers. You need those folks that are doing the back of the house stuff. You're also going to need folks that are handling what we traditionally refer to as tech support for those folks that unfortunately are having issues or difficulties. You're meaning your end users in either hearing or seeing or what have you. Redundancy is key. Redundancy in terms of the platform, redundancy in terms of the capability of that platform, redundancy in terms of personnel, and the ability to go ahead and quickly switch on and off different things as needed. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Your course design is predicated on maximizing your course objectives. We all have different objectives that we need to go ahead and satisfy, not only from our client side, but also to ensure that the folks that are getting this type of training best understand and best receive that training. The course design works off of those objectives, but it could very well shift and it changes based upon the platform's capability. Not all platforms are created equal. In one platform, we've got a tremendous amount of functionality, but we cannot get the fidelity in terms of interpretation. Therefore, we've got to switch to another platform. And that platform has tremendous capability in terms of the audio fidelity and interpretation, but it doesn't have near the amount of capability in terms of other components that we use, interactive components, and we'll touch on those in a moment. And then the most important part, you can see it's bolded and it's italicized, is continual quality assurance and performance improvement. You've got to continually look at these things and be honest with yourself and see where you are in terms of imparting that information, and is it working out, and is it doing what it needs to, not only for your team but ultimately for the end user. The biggest issue you're going to have is network limitations, or rather it's technical, but we're going to touch on network limitations. You're going to have organizational security protocols. Every single one of you has battled with this at one point in time or another. Firewalls, audio video software, and hardware limitations. Remember too, just because you have the latest whiz-bang update and everything peripheral, whatever, yada yada, added to your computer doesn't mean that the individual in Tucumcari, New Mexico, not picking on Tucumcari, I like it, I've been through it, neat place, but that individual in Tucumcari, New Mexico, or in Brunswick, Maine, or in Lukenbach, Texas, wherever that individual may be running an out-of-date machine or an out-of-date software package and or operating system. That could very well limit their ability to see what it is you're doing. And then the biggest culprit of all through the virtual side, which we have learned over and over again, is bandwidth and reliability. It's a challenge anyway. I run a T1 line out of my home office. However, even with a T1 line, I experience issues in terms of connectivity, in terms of bandwidth, throttling it up and down. It's something that is constantly an issue and a challenge, and more importantly, that's why you need to have that redundancy, that force multiplier in terms of your technical as well as backup personnel. The old adage, 2 is 1, 1 is none. We have been in multiple situations where somebody is dropped because of their ISP, their internet service provider, and we've had to pick up in the midst of a training event to support them. So be aware of that. In terms of tech savviness, if you will, participant familiarity with platform features is huge. I dare say that the bulk of the platforms that are out there that we are using that are capable of doing what we need them to do, folks have a little bit of understanding, but not a whole hell of a lot. Zoom is you've heard, people just now ubiquitously refer to, oh, you're having a Zoom meeting. Zoom is probably the most well-known platform out there, but of course it too has had its challenges. You're going to be dealing with that, and that goes to the heart of what Holly Harden was discussing in terms of tech troubleshooting and tech sessions. You're going to have to troubleshoot a lot, guys. That's just the way it is. You're going to have to troubleshoot a lot. This is an example of a slide, or not an example. This is one of the technical support slides that we go ahead and put up at the beginning of every one of our training events. This happens to be my program, Radiant Response, where we go through the different types of ways to ensure that you can hear, that you can speak, and how to activate and mute your microphone, etc., within Adobe Connect, which is one of the platforms that we use. We also, as Holly stated, we pre-plan technical sessions to ensure that everybody can connect and not only open up their microphone, but also can hear us. Even with that, we still have people that have issues each and every time, but we try and limit and minimize those issues as much as possible. As far as troubleshooting, you're only as good as the platform stability and the bandwidth accessed by the end user. Some platforms that you use, some platforms that we use, all of the material, all of your PowerPoints, your videos, your polls, everything is uploaded to their servers. And it is pushed down from on high, so to speak, down to those folks that are the end user, the participant. Others, you're sharing your screen. And so there is tremendous amount of connectivity potential for issue abounding, depending on what platform you're using and how you're using it and what you're doing. For the example, T1 to 64K, you've got everything in between, and it's just that's the way it is. Every platform has issues, and of course, you have to deal with them. As I said before, Murphy is alive and well. Catastrophic failures are indeed real, and they're not fun. I can personally attest to that. We were in the process of doing in fact, it was the inaugural workshop to one of the programs that we were doing virtually. And we had already hosted events both domestically as well as internationally in terms of virtual training. This one was a new one. We had gotten about an hour in, and then all of a sudden, literally and figuratively, all hell broke loose. We lost complete capability to manipulate the platform. We lost control. It was, as we refer to, dead stick. What I'm getting at is we ultimately had to completely shut down the workshop, shut down the platform. Fortunately, our CEO immediately reached out to the CEO of this virtual provider, and we were very lucky to be able to work with their senior corporate team to examine what went on. And fortunately, they admitted the fact that it was their fault. It was their servers that crashed. It was their servers that took us down. Why I bring that up is because in that week period of time, and we were fortunate in that we were able to go ahead and put the workshop back on to continue the portion that we weren't able to provide originally. We did a ton of quality assurance and performance improvement, of looking at redundancy, of looking at capability, of looking at backups, things that we had perhaps thought about, but we didn't necessarily have plans and procedures for in place. And that event, that catastrophic failure, taught us a tremendous amount of how to react to issues since then. Fortunately, we haven't had another one, but we have multiple levels of redundancy in place in the event that, God forbid, that happens again. Not everyone's tech savvy. Be aware of that. Just because people have been living virtually for a year doesn't mean that they necessarily know all the ins and outs. You've got to make sure that they're familiar with the platform that they're utilizing. And then finally, FedRAMP and FSMA. If you don't know what those are, I'm going to give you the 150,000 foot view of those right now. FedRAMP is a Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. Basically, it's the GSA way of saying, yes, this platform is good to use within the federal government, or no, it's not. I mentioned Zoom earlier. Zoom had issues with that. In fact, they came up with Zoom for Gov. And that is a platform that we use in addition to all the other ones that we utilize, but it is FedRAMP approved. All of that came out of the Federal Information Security Management Act of 2002. And you can see there's two different phases to that. But be aware that you can't just go ahead and arbitrarily say, I'm going to pick this or I'm going to pick that. If you're working in and around anything federal or working with any type of government organization, particularly the federal government. So be aware of not just FSMA, but especially the, if you will, the imprimatur of FedRAMP to a virtual platform. Again, the different choices that you got out there. You've got to be aware of what works best for what you're trying to do, and you may have to go back and forth between one or the other based upon what you're doing. In terms of the different platforms, we've got a variety of activities, as you can see there, across multiple courses that work for those learning objectives. And we try to optimize a virtual platform to make it as I said before, how do you get to real? Try and make it as real as you can for the participants. Video activities are very, very valuable. I'm going to go ahead and play a quick video that helps to set up what it is that we do. And I will be back in just a moment. All right. Thank you for bearing with me on that. We're closing in on done, I promise, but this is some of the most important pieces that hopefully we can convey to you, and that's the facilitation piece. The picture on the left is me at an international event, and I guarantee I'm pointing at somebody who has made a great point in terms of someone else's discussion. And then I've got my subject matter experts who are on the dais behind me that I can turn around to and say, what do you think about that, fellas? And then you move to the virtual training where you're literally just talking to the air. You don't have that camaraderie. You don't have that rapport. Virtual facilitation is hard, but it's not impossible. You don't have any visual cues. You don't have heads nodding, or you don't see people nodding off because you're either not doing a good enough job or you're just getting too much into the weeds. You can't read body language. You can't pick on somebody for a response, or you can't see, hey, that person agrees with the point. Let me go ahead and pick on him or her to help prove the point that I'm trying to make. And most importantly, you can't build a rapport with the audience. The alternate side of that is you've got a ton of inputs coming in at the same time with your screen. You've got different chat rooms that are going, whether they're private chats, meaning between the hosts, between the facilitation teams. You've got text, you've got email, you've got timers, you got people that I can't hear you, I can't see the screen, etc. Those are issues that you've got to deal with. That I think, for those of us who facilitate training, for those of us who facilitate meetings, I think virtual facilitation is probably one of the hardest things that you can do, but it's not impossible. As far as successes go, there's a tremendous amount of what we have learned in terms of virtual delivery. I think virtual delivery and virtual platforms, virtual training are definitely here to stay. I think, to Mark and Holly's great points earlier on, they certainly augment the in-person training. I think we can safely say that in-person training has not been replaced by virtual, but is enhanced by it. You've got to make sure that you know what you're doing in terms of facilitation, and you've got to make it as interactive and as interesting for your audience as possible. Otherwise, you're going to lose them. We have found, as Holly and Mark described earlier, that the sweet spot is about 2 hours. Some of our training sessions are under two, some are a little bit over two. Do what works best for your audience and for your participants. And that speaks especially to the attention span because you've got a ton of inputs that are coming in at the same time. But the most important part, besides facilitation, is to ensure that the platform that you use is not only the right one for you, but more importantly, that you've got a plan for when technology fails because it's going to happen to you. I think every single one of us has been part of a meeting where your technology has failed. Be aware of it, have a contingency for it, have backups for it. You've got a tremendous amount of capability in terms of the virtual world now, but you also have to be smart about it. Happy to take any questions. You can get there's my contact information there. I am very grateful to the EMI SIG cadre for allowing us the opportunity to give a little bit of background on what it is that we've learned in terms of virtual training. If there's anything we can do for you, please don't hesitate to ask. And looking forward to hearing your questions and to working with you all. Thank you guys. Be safe. Use whichever platform to maximize its usage for your customers, so to speak, for your students, and that is a constant challenge. Um, we keep finding too with a lot of these virtual platforms, they're constantly performing updates that are also paired with updates for operating systems such as Windows and others, and that I can't tell you how many times we have started a virtual program and then all of a sudden people get the prompt, update your version now. And of course, they go ahead and hit update and then they're temporarily knocked off for a while. So there's a lot of little pitfalls that we have found. There's a lot of challenges, but there's also some great lessons learned that we've found throughout the process.
Great job and so nice. I mean, I could hear you the whole time. I did hear a few comments in the chat that some people couldn't hear us part of the time. And so, this is technology and sometimes it works great and other times not so much. So hopefully you can hear us now. And if you missed Ron's great comments, I think you can go back and hear those. It looks like people are hearing you now, and I don't see any other questions yet. We also have Holly and Mark that are still here from the first session. So if someone has a question either for Ron, Holly, or Mark, please put it in the chat and we'll really be happy to hear from you, and they're happy to answer questions.
I will tell people this though, it's virtual working on virtual programs. It is a very unique environment as opposed to the way that we're typically used to doing either functional exercises or discussion based exercises because there are so many other inputs that you may not necessarily have considered. I know I went on and on and on about redundancy, as well as different personnel postings, if you will. But it's just something to keep in mind that it can be done uh, with maybe one or two people, but depending upon what you want to do, how you want to deliver it, and the type of activities that you want to either put forth or employ, you could very well be increasing the amount of folks involved in the virtual training as well as putting on the presentation.
Good point, Ron. Thank you. We did have a question that came in from Patty Billy saying, have you come up against firewalls at the different
Oh yeah,
sites, and how were you able to overcome that?
yeah, Patty, fabulous question, and yes, and it's not have we, it's how many times, and we continue to do so. Um, can tell you, federal law enforcement are the absolute worst in terms of firewall and restrictions, but also academia poses issues in that regard. Uh, Regrettably, and I hate to say it this way, but the workaround is for people to go off-site and to either access the program via their personal network or their personal machine. Sometimes we have folks that are literally sitting in the lobby of a field office or their building or whatnot on a machine that is not necessarily tied to the network, but is able to work within that within that area. We're not, and by all means, we're not telling anybody to do anything that is contrary to their policies and procedures and guidelines related to their uh, place of employment. But we've had several different workarounds, and typically, unfortunately, they involve unique solutions, if you will. But firewalls are here to stay. It's just that's the way it is, and sometimes, unfortunately, there are some folks that are not able to participate. What we have found, and I'll give you an example with the FBI. Uh, there are components or there are areas within FBI field offices that connect outside, if you will, that aren't secure in terms of compartmentalized information or a SCIF, if you will. What we have seen is the hybrid model where people will go ahead and co-locate in, say, a conference room, put it on one machine, and then they're able to communicate. They're able to participate in that respect. But we're constantly seeing that, and that's always a challenge.
Great
Great question.
response. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. We do have another question that came in from Terry Nord saying, how do you, quote, demonstrate proficiency virtually?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
How do you demonstrate proficiency virtually?
Well, that's actually, that is something that we are constantly looking at. What we do is polling that we do polling at the front end as well as at the back end, the same questions to gauge the audience's level of understanding and, if you will, education. So we literally can go ahead and chart what we got in terms of responses on the front end, and then we ask the same question on the back end, and we can see there's a significant delta in some cases, or we can definitely see the change in terms of awareness, understanding, what have you. We also gauge that too in terms of post-exercise critiques, responses, submit. We make sure to send a post-exercise questionnaire to everyone that is registered, and ask for their comments, ask for their input, and it's both narrative as well as, if you will, Likert style, where we go ahead and enumerate the questions where we can quickly create data sets and put them into our database and crunch that information and see if we're moving in the right direction or not.
Wow. Lots of moving parts, right?
Absolutely. It's a constantly evolving and moving process.
Mm, yeah, it's like
And then of course, we also have those unintended things. Uh,
right.
our team, we're all pet owners and pet lovers, and so we are unofficial mascots who like to every now and then join in the virtual trainings. They like to let
Perfect.
themselves be known. Yes.
Well, it's a common theme in our social hour. We're always showing our pets. You'll see Jen has shown her pets several times. She's got the cutest two little Yorkies that she shows, Samson and Delilah. So that's part of the fun, right?
Oh yeah. Everybody on our team knows my miniature schnauzer Fritz. Fritz lets you know that he wants to be heard. So yeah, those are some of those unintended consequences of working in the virtual realm.
I think, we have to take the better with the bitter. So I think that's one of the better things that dogs are all really happy that we're home.
I'll give everybody a pro tip. The next time that your pet just sounds off, just if you will, immediately say, "Well, whomever has the dog or cat or whatever it is in the background, please silence your mic." So it immediately throws the look at away from you into somebody else out there.
That's funny. Good point. Great tip.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions before we end this session? Oh, here's one other. Kenton says, so I don't know all the different organizations here, but do you follow DOE Order 151 Delta? We would not be able to conduct a virtual exercise training. Yes, drills maybe, but no to exercises.
Well, I think it depends upon the office that you are working in. I could be wrong, and I'm going to look to Holly as well as to my other colleagues here to help me out with that. But as I understand it, it relates to the office in some respects, and there are many trainings that we do that are not 100% DOE related or specific to a particular office or lab or what have you. And so there's again, as I understand it, I believe there are workarounds in that regard.
Sure. Good response, and we thank you for that.
No problem.
Ron, great responses to all the questions,
Thank you.
and thank you. And if someone thinks of a question that they didn't get a chance to ask, Ron's contact information is in the speaker list as well as Holly and Mark. So feel free to reach out to them. They're happy to continue to converse it with you and answer questions. This will conclude our session, but remember that it's recorded. This presentation is recorded and is available for playback at your convenience. We ask you to complete the survey to confirm your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session. It's at 2:30 Mountain Time, seeing the forest for the trees, developing a common operational picture. And so just check the schedule and join the session of your choice. And don't forget to join us for the scavenger hunt tonight. We love to see anyone who joins us on the social hour. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.